Imagine dedicating, like, decades of your life to mastering foreign languages.
Right. Which is no small feat.
No, not at all. And you successfully conquer French, Chinese, and Spanish. You confidently navigate entirely different alphabets, vastly different grammatical structures, and these incredibly complex tonal systems.
I mean, to the outside world, you're basically a linguistic master at that point.
Exactly. You look like a genius. And yet, behind closed doors, you completely, spectacularly fail to learn Italian, Malay, and Japanese.
Wow. Yeah, that's a huge contrast.
Right. So how does a language expert fundamentally fail at learning languages? Well, today, we are cracking that exact code in this deep dive.
I'm really looking forward to this one.
Me too.
Yeah.
We're pulling apart this amazing masterclass from a video titled Don't Waste Your Time Learning English Like This. It's by Keith from the English Speaking Success channel.
Oh, Keith's stuff is great.
It really is. And he's distilled over 20 years of his own personal language journey. You know, the massive wins and the glaring, embarrassing defeats into this framework that explains why we succeed and probably more importantly, why we fail.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, right? We almost always learn infinitely more from our failures than our successes.
Oh, absolutely.
Because when a person sits down and learns a language quickly or, picks up a new skill without much friction, that success is often just this very messy, opaque combination of things.
Like what kind of things?
Well, like luck, timing, environmental advantages, and maybe a little bit of baseline cognitive privilege, too. And it's really hard to replicate luck.
That makes a lot of sense. You can't just copy someone's good timing.
Exactly. But failure, the mechanical breakdown of failure is usually stark, it's obvious, and it's highly instructive.
So by analyzing the anatomy of why Keith failed so profoundly in Italy, but succeeded so systematically in China, we can excavate the hidden traps that are, sabotaging your learning journey right now.
Yeah, we are looking for the absolute common denominators of cognitive achievement here.
Okay, let's unpack this. The breakdown in Italy is really where we need to start. Because it exposes a lie that, honestly, every single person listening to this right now has told themselves at some point.
Oh, for sure, myself included.
Right. So Keith was living in Italy for 2 months. And he wasn't just there on a casual vacation wandering through museums or whatever.
He was actually working, right?
Yeah, he was contracted to work with the Italian police, teaching them English.
Okay, wow. That's a pretty intense environment.
Very. And while he was immersed in that environment, he naturally picked up some survival Italian. Enough to order coffee, navigate the streets, handle basic restaurant interactions.
So he had some real momentum going.
He did. But then his contract ends, he flies home, practices for maybe a week or two, and then just completely abandons it.
And let me guess the reason he gave himself.
It's the exact same reason you and I have used a million times to abandon a project. I just didn't have time.
There it is, the classic excuse. And that phrase is basically the ultimate psychological shield.
How so?
Well, it protects our ego from the discomfort of our own choices, right? Keith experienced this massive paradigm shift when he finally forced himself to translate what "I don't have time" actually means.
This is what?
He realized it's a comforting fiction. The actual translation is simply, "I choose not to do this."
Ouch. Yeah, that is a brutal sentence to look at in the mirror.
It really is. But making that linguistic shift moves you from a passive mindset into an active one.
Okay, wait, explain the passive mindset first.
So in the passive mindset, you're treating time like weather, like it's just something that happens to you.
Oh, I like that analogy, like it's just raining time on you.
Exactly. You tell yourself that the clock is this oppressive external force, and errands or emails are just raining down on you, leaving absolutely no possible room for your goals.
And the passive mindset completely absolves you of responsibility, doesn't it? If time just evaporated, well, it's not your fault you didn't study your vocabulary today.
Right, you're just the victim of a busy day.
But shifting to, I choose not to do this, forces you into this space of radical accountability.
Yes, because time is a fixed, unyielding currency. Every human being on the planet has the exact same 24-hour allocation.
So if you skip your language practice, the time didn't just vanish into a black hole. You actively spent that currency on something else.
Exactly. You prioritized a work project, or let's be honest, you prioritized scrolling through a social media feed.
Or taking a nap. I'm guilty of that one.
We all are. But owning the fact that you simply valued the nap more than the language practice. I mean, it hurts your pride initially, but it immediately hands the steering wheel of your life back to you.
And taking that steering wheel requires a specific defensive strategy, right? Keith refers to this as putting on blinkers,
Yeah, he borrows the term from equestrian training.
like for racehorses.
Exactly. To get anything done, you have to be fiercely, aggressively focused on the task in front of you. You have to actively block out the periphery.
So you have to guard your time with a level of ruthlessness that honestly might feel a bit uncomfortable at first.
It will feel uncomfortable because you're intentionally blinding yourself to this endless stream of alternative choices you could be making in that moment.
Right. But let's explore the mechanics of those blinkers for a second. Because the horse racing analogy is fascinating, but I think it also highlights a potential danger for you, the listener.
Okay, what kind of danger?
Well, in horse racing, blinkers aren't just blindfolds. They are these specifically designed leather cups placed around a horse's eyes to prevent panic.
Right, because horses are prey animals.
Exactly. They have monocular vision. If they see sudden, unpredictable movement in their peripheral vision, their amygdala fires, and they just freak out.
Like the bolts.
Yeah. But for a human being living a modern, incredibly complex life, walking around with blinkers on sounds like a recipe for total systemic collapse.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah. Like if you are constantly ignoring the periphery, ignoring your family, avoiding your chores, neglecting your inbox, just to aggressively focus on this one singular goal, you're going to burn out and your life will fall apart.
This raises an important question, and the distinction between microfocus and macro blindness is essential here.
Okay, break that down for us.
Keith is absolutely not suggesting that you adopt a blinkered mentality for your entire existence.
Because that would just lead to profound social isolation.
Exactly. The blinkers are deployed strictly and exclusively for the dedicated period of study.
So just a set amount of time.
Right. If you look at your fixed currency of 24 hours and you actively carve out, say, 60 minutes for your learning, that single hour is when the blinkers drop down.
The rest of the world doesn't cease to exist.
No, you're just making a localized, conscious contract with yourself that peripheral distractions have zero authority over your attention for those 60 minutes.
You are basically telling your brain that the non-urgent email simply does not exist until minute 61.
It is an exercise in cognitive boundary setting.
Which is so hard to do nowadays.
It really is, because every time you switch tasks, even just glancing at a text message and then looking back at your textbook, your brain incurs what cognitive psychologists call a switch cost.
A switch cost, like a penalty.
Basically, yeah. It takes significant neurological energy to disengage from the syntax of a foreign language, process the context of a text message, and then re-engage with the language.
Oh, wow. So it's actively draining you.
Exactly. By doing that, you are draining the very glucose your brain needs to form new neural pathways.
So the blinkers are there to prevent this cognitive leakage.
Yes, you aren't holding your breath for the rest of your life. You are just fiercely guarding a tiny fraction of your day to allow deep learning to actually occur without interference.
That makes total sense. But, guarding that single hour on day one is incredibly romantic.
Oh, day one is great.
You have your brand new notebook, the spine isn't even cracked, your highlighters are perfectly arranged, and your motivation is just through the roof. Dropping the blinkers is easy then.
Right, because of the novelty.
Exactly. But dropping those exact same blinkers on day 112, when the novelty is completely evaporated and you are staring at a confusing grammar rule that makes absolutely zero sense, that requires a fundamentally different psychological engine entirely.
It does. The honeymoon phase ends, and you slam right into the biological reality of learning.
And that transition from the honeymoon phase to the reality of the grind exposes one of the most toxic trends in modern education, particularly on social media.
Oh, Keith calls this out with zero hesitation.
We are currently drowning in targeted ads and algorithmic content promising absolute miracles.
You see them everywhere. Become fluent in 3 months.
Or master English in just 10 minutes a day with these 5 magic hacks.
Right. These influencers have completely weaponized our desire for efficiency.
But Keith points directly to empirical data to dismantle this, doesn't he?
He does. He references the Cambridge English Assessment Metrics, which utilize the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, or the CEFR.
And for context, for you listening, this framework grades language proficiency on a scale from A1, which is absolute beginner, up to C2, which is essentially native level mastery.
Yes, and according to Cambridge's actual data, moving up just one single proficiency band, for example, moving from a B1 intermediate level to a B2 upper intermediate level requires roughly 200 hours of guided, intensive study.
200 hours for one single level. That completely shatters the viral illusion of the 30-day sprint.
What's fascinating here is the conflict of interest driving that illusion.
You mean with the social media influencers?
Exactly. Content creators operate in an ecosystem that rewards engagement, not long-term pedagogical success.
So they might have one eye on education, but the other eye is inextricably locked on algorithmic growth.
Right, and the algorithm heavily favors the impossible seductive dream.
Because it sounds easy.
Yeah, a video promising that you can hack a language in 30 days will generate infinitely more clicks, shares, and ad revenue than a video grounded in the sobering reality of a 9-month, 200-hour marathon.
But the human brain does not care about viral engagement.
Not at all. Actual linguistic science, the sheer biological necessity of physically growing new neural pathways, demands a marathon.
You just cannot shortcut the biological limits of cognitive adaptation, no matter how many hacks some TikTok creator tries to sell you.
Exactly.
But here's why that 3-month lie is so incredibly seductive for you, the listener. 200 hours sounds terrifying.
It's a huge number.
It is. If I sat you down on day one when you barely know how to say hello and thank you, and I looked you in the eye and said, it is going to take you 9 months of dedicated, blinker-grueling focus just to go from being a beginner to being slightly less of a beginner, you would probably just walk away.
Most people would. The mountain just looks impossibly high.
So the lie basically acts as the bait to get you in the door.
Yes, but the tragedy is that the bait ultimately poisons the learner.
How do you mean?
Well, yes, the lie gets you in the door, but it mathematically guarantees that you will experience a massive crisis of confidence.
Oh, because when month 3 rolls around.
Exactly. When month 3 hits and you realize you are nowhere near the promised fluency, you do not blame the influencer who sold you the lie. You blame yourself.
Wow. Yeah, you internalize the failure.
You start thinking, I must be cognitively deficient, or I am too old to learn, or I just wasn't born with the language gene.
And so you quit. Not because you were incapable, but because you were given a fundamentally broken map.
Exactly. You expect a sprint, so you run at full speed, exhaust yourself in a mile, and collapse, completely unaware that the finish line is a marathon distance away.
That's such a good way to put it.
And if you look at the architecture of traditional language institutes or university language programs, you see the reality.
Right. They aren't structured as 3-month fluency boot camps.
No. A single level is typically structured to run for a full academic year, which is roughly 9 months.
And that pacing is not arbitrary.
Not at all. It is meticulously designed to align with the neurobiology of learning. The brain requires significant downtime to consolidate information.
It needs spaced repetition to move vocabulary from the fragile, easily overwritten short-term memory into robust long-term retention.
Yes. Synapses literally need time to strengthen their connections through a process called myelination, where the neural pathways become insulated and efficient.
So by acknowledging and accepting that this is a 200-hour marathon, you instantly relieve a massive amount of psychological pressure on yourself.
You stop judging your day-to-day performance against an impossible standard.
It completely reframes the entire experience. If you stumble on a conjugation in month 4, you aren't failing. You are simply on mile 12 of a 26-mile race.
Right. The struggle means you are exactly where you're supposed to be.
But, I mean, surviving a marathon of that magnitude requires an immense amount of caloric energy, both literal and psychological.
You definitely cannot run 200 hours on an empty tank.
Right. So to fuel that marathon, Keith introduces this concept of mojo.
Yes, his shorthand for motivation.
And he utilizes this really brilliant visualization technique here. He insists that you must view your motivation not as this abstract feeling that comes and goes, but as a living, breathing pet like a dog or a cat that you have brought into your home.
I love this analogy because when you adopt a pet, you understand the implicit responsibility, right?
You can't just feed it a massive meal on the first day and then expect it to forage for itself for the next year.
No. If you do not continually actively feed your pet every single day, it will become lethargic, its health will deteriorate, and eventually it will die.
And your internal mojo operates on the exact same biological principles. Motivation is not a perpetual motion machine. If you do not actively, intentionally feed it, it will just wither away.
And feeding that pet requires a highly specific diet. Keith argues that we feed our mojo through SMART goals.
So targets that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
Exactly. But more crucially, the absolute highest calorie food for your motivation is a deep, visceral connection to your why.
Like your actual real-world reason for learning.
Right, he brings up the IELTS exam as the perfect example.
And for those listening who might be unfamiliar, IELTS is the International English Language Testing System. It's this incredibly grueling, high-stakes, standardized test that basically acts as the ultimate gatekeeper for university admissions and immigration visas across the English-speaking world.
And let's be honest, nobody wakes up with a burning, passionate desire to conquer a standardized reading comprehension test.
No. Passing the IELTS is a mechanical necessity. It is not the dream.
Exactly. The dream is the security of moving your family abroad to a safer country.
Or securing that specific engineering job in Toronto that will fundamentally alter your family's generational wealth.
The exam is merely a toll booth on the highway to your actual life.
So when you are deep into the marathon, say at hour 140, and the cognitive fatigue is just so heavy you can barely keep your eyes open, the prospect of passing a test is not going to generate the dopamine required to keep you studying.
No, because dopamine is the neurochemical driver of motivation. It's released when we anticipate a meaningful reward.
And staring at a toll booth does not trigger a dopamine release.
Exactly. Only the vivid, emotional anticipation of the destination on the other side of that toll booth can trigger the neurochemistry required to keep your mojo alive.
But, even when you have a powerful why, you can still accidentally starve your motivation pet if you misunderstand the environment you are in.
Oh, this is such an important point.
Because Keith shares a story from his own life here that honestly completely shattered one of my biggest preconceived notions about learning.
The Madrid story.
Yes. So he lived in Madrid for an entire year. And in the language learning community, living in the capital city of the country whose language you were trying to acquire is viewed as the absolute holy grail.
It's the dream scenario for everyone.
Right. But Keith admits he wasn't improving at all. He was totally stagnant.
And his roommate offered him that classic, universally accepted advice, right?
Yeah. The roommate said, "Why would you waste money on a classroom? We live in Madrid. Just go out onto the street, talk to the locals, go to the tapas bars, haggle at the markets, learn like a native."
And what did Keith do?
He completely ignored that advice. He walked into a building, sat down at a desk, and joined a formal, structured language class.
And as a result, his proficiency skyrocketed.
It did. And it wasn't because the textbook contained some secret Spanish dialect or something. It was because the classroom shattered his illusion of immersion.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the roommate's advice represents this incredibly pervasive myth of street immersion.
We're always told the absolute best way to learn is to just move to the country.
Right. There is this deeply romanticized idea that if you simply physically relocate your body to a foreign country, you will just absorb the language by osmosis.
Like you imagine yourself wandering the cobblestone streets, effortlessly engaging in deep philosophical debates with the local baker, naturally soaking up the subjunctive tense.
But the reality of unstructured immersion is that it is a trap. It almost inevitably leads to a severe vocabulary and grammar plateau.
Why is that? Does this mean the romanticized idea of just absorbing a language by osmosis is a complete myth?
Pretty much, yeah. Because when you are on the street, your brain prioritizes survival and efficiency over education.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right. When you are speaking to a stranger in a bakery, your singular goal is to acquire the bread and leave.
You aren't trying to practice complex grammar.
No, you use the most heavily practiced, basic transactional phrases possible. How much is this? Thank you. Goodbye. You are not being pushed out of your comfort zone.
And the baker isn't going to pause the transaction to correct your past participle agreement.
Exactly. You end up having the exact same introductory, low-level conversation 100 times a day.
So raw immersion provides a massive amount of environmental context, but it provides absolutely zero pedagogical structure.
Yes. Without intentional rewards, raw immersion lacks the dopamine hits necessary to keep that pet of motivation alive.
This challenges everything we are told. But if raw immersion lacks structure, how did the formal classroom actually solve Keith's plateau in Madrid?
Well, the classroom provided two critical elements that the street completely lacked: a community of friction and intentional dopamine milestone.
Okay, a community of friction.
Yeah, on the street, Keith was an isolated outsider just trying to survive transactions. In the classroom, he was suddenly surrounded by a community of peers who were, as he put it, in the same boat.
So they provided a social infrastructure.
Exactly. When his motivation lagged, he had classmates to commiserate with and cheer him on. Furthermore, a structured class provides intentional rewards.
Like grades are moving up a level.
Right. Keith even advises learners to create their own rewards, like buying a book or going to the cinema when hitting a milestone. The formal class inherently builds these milestones into the curriculum.
While on the street, there are no metrics for progress.
None. No one tells you that you are improving. In a classroom, you have a teacher explicitly highlighting your growth, which provides those crucial dopamine hits.
Okay, so you have your well-fed motivation pet, you have your blinkers on, and you are sitting in your structured environment.
You're doing everything right.
But even with all of that preparation, you can still be completely crushed by the sheer psychological weight of your own ambition.
Oh, easily.
If your goal is, I want to be perfectly fluent, the scale of that task is paralyzing. It's like standing at base camp of Mount Everest and staring at the peak. The sheer altitude makes your legs heavy before you even take a single step.
So to survive, you have to radically manipulate your own perspective.
And Keith tackles this with his fourth strategy: big goal, small steps.
Yes, and he uses a very elegant rambling or hiking analogy to explain the cognitive mechanics of this.
How does that work?
Well, if you set out on a hike and you fixate your mind entirely on the fact that you have a grueling, continuous 10-kilometer loop ahead of you, your brain preemptively calculates the energy expenditure.
Keep bracing for impact.
Exactly. Your amygdala, which is the fear and stress center of your brain, registers that massive energy demand as a threat, and you begin to feel physically fatigued before you have even begun.
Because your brain is trying to conserve energy by discouraging the massive undertaking.
Right. However, if you take that exact same 10-kilometer hike and mentally chop it into compartmentalized segments first, we only need to walk to that small peak. Then we rest. Next, we just navigate down to the lake. Finally, we cross the valley to the village.
The physical distance remains identical.
Exactly. But the psychological burden is utterly transformed. The prefrontal cortex can easily process and plan for the small step without triggering the amygdala's panic response.
And Keith actually stress-tested this exact psychological manipulation when he moved to China, didn't he?
He did, and Mandarin Chinese is notoriously one of the most impenetrable languages for a native English speaker to acquire.
Right, because the writing system relies on thousands of intricate characters instead of an alphabet.
And the spoken language uses a complex tonal system where changing the pitch of your voice completely changes the definition of a word.
It is a monumental undertaking, and when he arrived, his overarching ambition was high-level fluency.
But he possessed the self-awareness to realize that holding on to that massive goal would crush him.
So he took the 10-kilometer Everest hike and intentionally fractured it into 3 distinct yearly peaks.
And the architecture of his strategy is what allowed him to succeed where so many expatriates fail.
What were the peaks?
He designed year 1 to be purely about immediate, intimate connection, communicating solely with family and friends in highly forgiving environments.
What?
Year 2 expanded the perimeter outward, navigating daily conversations on the street, handling shop transactions, and speaking with strangers.
And then year 3?
Year 3 was the ultimate professional peak, acquiring the specialized vocabulary and cultural nuance required to actually function and work in a corporate Chinese environment.
But here's the most astonishing part of that strategy to me. To conquer just the very first peak, year 1, simply being able to talk to friends, he didn't just casually practice on the weekends.
No, he was incredibly disciplined.
He enrolled in an intensive 1.5-hour language class every single morning at 8 a.m. for 8 grueling months before he even went to his actual job.
That is dedication.
And all of that immense sacrifice and effort only got him to an A2 level on that CEFR scale we discussed earlier.
Which is still great, but it's not fluency.
Right, A2 is upper beginner. It's survival mode. It's knowing how to say, please pass the sugar, or I don't like the weather today.
It sounds discouraging until you realize the psychological genius of what he did.
Else.
By deliberately shrinking his horizon to just reaching the A2 level, he eliminated the cognitive overload of fluency.
Oh, because when you obsess over the massive end goal of working in a foreign language, you get lost in an anxiety spiral.
Exactly. You start panicking about complex corporate vocabulary that you won't even need for 3 years. You completely detach from the present moment.
So by forcing his focus entirely on the microscopic step, waking up at 8 a.m. just to learn the tones for pass the sugar, he anchored his brain in the now.
Yes. The paralyzing anxiety of the distant future is neutralized by the actionable, highly manageable task of the immediate present.
So what does this all mean? Let's apply this directly to you, the listener, right now. If your overarching, life-altering goal is securing a Band 7 on that IELTS exam, Keith's rambling strategy dictates that you must immediately stop looking at the band 7.
Right, because if your current proficiency is hovering at a band 5, staring at the requirements for a 7 will only induce neurological panic.
You must shrink your horizon to the next 3 months and strictly the next 3 months. What are the specific, measurable actions you're going to execute before breakfast for the next 90 days to just crawl a fraction of an inch forward?
You have to narrow your vision so intensely that you can actually lift your foot to take the next step.
Shrinking the horizon creates an environment where success is not a distant, abstract possibility years down the line.
Success becomes an immediate daily occurrence.
Exactly. Every time you finish that morning task, you generate a small burst of dopamine, which in turn fuels the motivation pad for the next day.
It's a fantastic cycle.
But showing up for those small steps every morning is only a massive victory if you use the time right. I mean, sitting down at your desk at 8 a.m. with your blinkers on is half the battle. But, and this is a catastrophic but, the actual mechanics of what you do during that time dictates everything.
It really does. You can put in thousands of hours of discipline time and still arrive at absolute zero.
Which introduces us to what is arguably the most heartbreaking segment of Keith's entire methodology, his 10-year tragedy.
Yeah, this is a profound cautionary tale.
It really exposes the fundamental flaw in almost every traditional educational system on the planet.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Keith introduces his 5th rule here. Practice actively and practice a lot.
And to underscore why this is non-negotiable, he reveals this shocking personal failure. He studied French in a formal school setting for 10 solid years.
A literal decade of his youth was dedicated to this language.
And the curriculum was standard. Heavy emphasis on reading classic texts, rote memorization of complex grammar rules, and hours of passive listening to tapes.
And the outcome of a decade of study.
By the age of 18, he was functionally mute. He could not string together a spontaneous sentence in a language he had studied for 10 years.
10 years of effort, yielding a complete inability to speak. The frustration must have been unimaginable.
But how does the system fail so spectacularly?
To understand this, we must examine the deep neurological chasm between studying, which is fundamentally passive intake, and practicing, which is active output.
So why do schools lean so heavily on passive study?
Well, traditional educational institutions rely heavily on passive study out of sheer logistical necessity. From an administrative and industrial standpoint, it is infinitely cheaper and easier to test a student on a written grammar rule than it is to evaluate the messy, nuanced reality of spontaneous conversation.
That makes total sense. You can feed a multiple-choice grammar test through an automated grading scanner in seconds.
But you cannot feed a living, breathing conversation into a scanner.
Right. So schools adapt by teaching the mechanics of language as if it were a history timeline or a mathematical formula. Memorize this rule. Regurgitate this vocabulary list.
But language is not a static set of facts. It is a highly complex physical and cognitive skill, much closer to playing the violin or mastering a martial art.
But wait, I have to challenge this premise because it seems to completely contradict the most basic observation of human nature. Look at how babies learn to speak. Isn't reading and passive listening exactly how human infants acquire language?
It is, yeah.
They sit in a crib, absorbing the language around them entirely passively for years. They just listen to their parents talk, and eventually they start speaking. So if passive absorption works flawlessly for babies, why does Keith insist that adults must practice speaking, making phrases, and changing phrases at the exact same time they study? Why can't we just absorb it like infants?
That is the ultimate defense for passive learning, but it collapses the moment you look at the neurobiology of the brain.
Really? How so?
The brain of an infant and the brain of a mature adult exist in two fundamentally different states of neuroplasticity.
Okay.
An infant's brain is an unparalleled learning machine. It is a blank slate, rapidly constructing the foundational neural architecture for language entirely from scratch. They do not have an existing dominant linguistic framework that interferes with the new sounds.
But for an adult, that magical window of effortless passive acquisition has slammed shut.
Exactly. You already have a dominant language deeply hardwired into your neural pathways.
So your brain is already deeply biased toward English, for example.
Yes. For adults, acquiring a new language isn't merely about understanding the theoretical grammar and the abstract cognitive centers of your brain. It requires a physical translation.
You have to move that theoretical knowledge out of your mind and down into the physical muscles of your mouth.
Precisely. Your tongue, your diaphragm, your vocal cords. This is controlled by Broca's area, a region in the frontal lobe linked to speech production.
So for decades, Your mouth muscles have been habituated to producing the specific foams of your native language.
Right. To speak French, you literally have to train your tongue to strike different positions against your palate. You are building physical muscle memory.
So it's like reading a textbook about the physics of riding a bicycle
Huh.
will not keep you balanced when you actually sit on the seat. You have to physically pedal. You have to scrape your knees.
Exactly. You have to practice exactly as much as you study. It requires a strict 1-to-1 ratio.
So if you spend 30 minutes passively reading a vocabulary list, you are obligated to spend the next 30 minutes physically speaking those words out loud.
You must put them into different sentences, roll them around in your mouth, and force your motor cortex to map the physical movements required to produce those sounds smoothly.
Whether you practice in the physical real world or in the digital space, which Keith accurately points out is the real world for modern communication, you must force the active output.
Right, to bridge the gap between knowing a word and speaking a word.
All right, let's assume you execute this perfectly. You put on your blinkers to guard your time. You accept the reality of the 200-hour marathon. You feed your motivation pet with a powerful why.
You shrink your horizon to small steps to avoid cognitive overload, and you actively build muscle memory by speaking out loud.
You are doing everything right, but then your own biology actively turns against you.
Oh, this is the worst part.
It is. Your brain actively decides to betray you by throwing out all the hard work you just did. Which brings us to the bonus round, arguably the most critical piece of the puzzle.
Yes, Keith's bonus sixth rule introduces the absolute necessity of review.
And to illustrate the stakes, he brings in a foundational concept from cognitive psychology, Hermann Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve.
Which is terrifying, honestly. This research mapped the trajectory of human memory decay, and it suggests you lose roughly 70% of the new information you learn within a mere 24 hours if you do not actively review it.
70% of your effort completely vaporized in a single day. That feels like a devastating flaw in human design.
It feels like a flaw, but it is actually a highly evolved, essential feature for survival.
Essential.
Yeah, your brain is a ruthlessly efficient, energy-conserving machine. Every single day, you are bombarded with millions of sensory data points, the color of a passing car, the sound of a distant siren, a random piece of trivia on a podcast.
And if your brain retained all of it, you would experience complete cognitive overload and exhaust your glucose reserves.
Exactly. So the brain aggressively prunes away anything it deems non-essential for survival.
Wow. So if you learn a lick of Spanish vocabulary on Monday at 9:00 a.m. and you never look at those words again on Tuesday, your brain assumes those words were useless junk data.
It literally deletes those neural connections to make room for whatever information you might need to survive Wednesday.
This is exactly why spaced repetition algorithms, like the ones powering apps like Duolingo, are so incredibly effective.
Yes, spaced repetition artificially hijacks this pruning process. You learn a word, and the algorithm forces you to recall it right at the exact moment your brain is about to delete it.
You recall it again a few days later, then a week later.
And each successful recall signals to the brain, wait, we keep needing this information, we better permanently insulate this neural pathway.
But Keith's personal method for combating this forgetting curve goes significantly deeper than just relying on flashcard apps, doesn't it?
It does. When he studies French or Spanish today, he doesn't just do rote review, he engages in a process he calls recycling.
Right. So if he finishes a class, he will naturally review his handwritten notes a few hours later. But a day or two after that, he won't just passively reread that same notebook.
He aggressively recycles the language by hunting for it in the wild.
Yeah. If his Tuesday class was focused entirely on weather vocabulary, he will purposely go onto YouTube on Thursday and watch a French meteorologist deliver a weather report, or he will stream a documentary about storm chasers.
And the neurological distinction between rote reviewing and active recycling is profound. Rote reviewing is inherently sterile.
Because you are looking at the vocabulary word in the exact same static context you originally learned it written in blue ink on a piece of lined paper.
Right. Your brain recognizes the pattern, but it doesn't necessarily view it as dynamic, real-world information. But recycling forces your brain to encounter that exact same vocabulary in a completely novel, unpredictable, and chaotic context.
So when you hear the word for thunder spoken rapidly by an animated news anchor, instead of slowly articulated by your teacher, it forces the brain to create an entirely new, robust neural connection.
It cements the knowledge far more deeply because your brain realizes, oh, this information isn't just an abstract academic exercise for a test. This data is vital for navigating the real world.
I love the mechanics of that. But I have to bring up a detail Keith mentioned, almost as a casual aside, about Hermann Ebbinghaus and his terrifying forgetting curve.
Okay, what's that?
So Ebbinghaus conducted this research back in the late 1800s. And Keith points out that Ebbinghaus was actually the sole test subject of his own entire study.
Wait, really? Just him?
Yes. He just sat alone in a room, testing his own ability to memorize lists of completely random nonsense syllables. Knowing that the entire foundation of this theory rests on a sample size of one guy testing himself makes me highly skeptical of the exact math.
That's a fair point.
Right. It feels like a fabricated metric that modern companies use to sell premium flashcard subscriptions.
Yeah.
So, looking at the science, is the exact 70% number really what matters here for the listener? Should they be stressed out about that specific metric?
The skepticism is completely warranted, and honestly, the specific percentage is largely irrelevant.
Okay.
Because whether Ebbinghaus's personal decay rate was 70%, or a more modern study finds it to be 50% or 40%, the universal biological mechanism of cognitive decay remains absolute. The brain aggressively deletes what it does not use.
So Ebbinghaus may have been a one-man sample size, but over a century of rigorous, peer-reviewed cognitive psychology has proven his core thesis to be structurally sound.
Exactly. The actionable takeaway for the listener is not to fixate on the math, it is to understand the extreme urgency of the biological mechanism.
If you do not construct a deliberate system to signal to your brain, hey, keep this, it is essential for my environment, your brain will throw your hard work into the trash.
Recycling is the flare you send up to tag that information as vital for survival.
It really is a relentless daily battle against the ruthless efficiency of our own neurology. Let's take a breath and survey the incredible terrain we have just navigated.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. If you are going to conquer a language, or honestly, if you are attempting to master any massive, intimidating skill in your life, you have to begin by stripping away the comforting fiction of, I have no time.
You must take radical ownership of your schedule and deploy the blinkers of microfocus to guard your attention.
And you must intellectually accept that you are embarking on a 200-hour biological marathon, entirely rejecting the toxic, algorithmic illusions of the 30-day social media sprint.
Yes, and you have to diligently and intentionally feed your motivation pet by anchoring yourself to your deepest why, completely avoiding the romanticized trap of unstructured street immersion.
Right, seeking out a community that provides friction and dopamine milestones instead.
You must navigate the psychological weight of the mountain by shrinking your horizon, breaking overwhelming ambitions into hyper-focused, manageable steps to prevent your amygdala from triggering behavioral paralysis.
You absolutely must output actively. You have to physically train the muscles of your mouth to bridge the neurological gap between theoretical study and actual physical muscle memory, avoiding the 10-year tragedy of passive learning.
And finally, you must outsmart the evolutionary pruning process of your own brain's forgetting curve by continually recycling your hard-won knowledge in fresh, chaotic, and unpredictable contexts before it is permanently deleted to save energy.
It really is a masterclass in the mechanics of human learning. But as we wrap up this deep dive, there is one final lingering concept. I want to leave you with something to mull over as you go about the rest of your day, which elevates everything Keith just taught us.
I love this part.
We spend so much of our energy, and we just spent an entire hour obsessing over the mechanical how of learning a language. We dissect the study hours, we optimize the spaced repetition algorithms, and we worry about muscle memory.
But we so rarely pause to consider the profound implications of how acquiring a language actually changes us.
Exactly. We consistently treat language merely as a utilitarian tool that we wield to accomplish a task, rather than recognizing it as a fundamental lens that shapes our entire perception of reality.
It changes how you think.
If it is true that language constructs the boundaries of our thoughts, if acquiring new vocabulary and foreign syntax literally provides us with entirely new frameworks for experiencing emotion, understanding culture, and forming human connection, then the stakes of this marathon are infinitely higher than simply passing a standardized test or ordering a coffee.
It's about who you become.
Right. Does giving up on learning a language because you convinced yourself you didn't have time just mean you missed out on acquiring a neat party trick? Or does it mean you actively chose to miss out on meeting a completely different, potentially richer, far more expansive version of yourself?
That is something to seriously think about the next time you sit down at your desk and decide whether or not to put those blinkers on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep aggressively guarding your time, keep feeding that motivation pet, and above all, keep diving deep into your curiosities. We will catch you next time.